Thanks. Look, it's wonderful that you've given up your day to join us here. Can I just get a feel for actually who's in the audience? If you're a doctor or medical practitioner, would you mind just putting your hand up? Wow, so that's an enormous number of people. That's absolutely fantastic. Dietitian, nutritionally trained, anybody like that? Fantastic. And just, somebody without any specific training but, interested in this lifestyle? All right, so that's still the majority of our audience. Well, look, welcome to all of you, and please do grab us in between sessions to ask us questions, and it's a real pleasure to have you here. So the question is, why would an orthopaedic surgeon know anything about nutrition? Well, it started off that I had a whole lot of patients that were coming to see me that were young and overweight, and you say to them, look, I'd like you to go and lose some weight, because every time you take a step, 3 times your body weight goes through your knee, and if you lose weight, your knee will hurt you less. But the problem is the current weight loss paradigm is that these people have to exercise to lose weight. And they all say, my knees hurt, I can't exercise. Now, don't get me wrong, I love exercise. It's fantastic. It's got lots of benefits. Just weight loss isn't actually one of them. So here we see a normal knee, and here we see an arthritic knee with bone on bone. And what do I do as a surgeon? I take one of these metal components and I put it inside the knee. So a lot of these patients had been through the whole treadmill of Jenny Craig, Weight Watchers, seeing GPs and nutritionists, and coming back to me and saying, look, I just can't lose weight. I'm not eating very much, I just can't lose weight. So I was looking at this stage for an option for them where I could give them some sort of anti-inflammatory type of diet, help them lose weight, and delay their surgery, because we know that patients that are obese when they have their surgery have a higher infection rate, their wounds break down more, they have a higher likelihood of redo orthopaedic surgery, and medically they're more likely to have kidney failure, heart attack, and just break the bone around the prosthesis. So generally speaking, it's a bad idea to do this sort of surgery in people that are significantly overweight. So as a simple orthopaedic surgeon, I needed to try and figure out a way in my own head to understand what was happening and why my patients couldn't lose weight. With some poetic license, I'm going to take you through that now and understand this is a gross oversimplification initially. So I understood that to survive as an organism, we needed certain things. We needed the basic building blocks, and to me, like these Lego blocks, it's a bit like protein. Now, I understand this is a gross oversimplification. Fat's a little bit unusual. It's a bit different to protein. Protein are the building blocks, and we can't do without them. Fat has lots of functions. It can act as a building block, but it also has to do with hormones, vitamins, and energy production. So fat as well is an essential ingredient. So we've got 2 essential ingredients, which are protein and fat. So that's clear in my head now. So we've got the building blocks sorted out. Now we need some sort of instructions of where these building blocks need to go. And there's a huge number of factors that get involved with that. But today I'm really only going to talk to you about one, which is insulin. And this is, again, a big oversimplification. So we've got our building blocks, we've got our general instructions. Now, how do we move the building blocks to where we need them to go? And that's the body produces energy. How do we get this energy? Well, we have 2 major energy sources. Let's call them glucose and fat, just to keep things simple. Now, if our energy is produced by glucose, we need to burn less fat to keep the fire stoked. This makes perfect sense. If you're burning one, you burn less of the other. Now, what happens if we give the body more glucose than what it can actually use? Well, you can see here the glucose builds up. The body starts getting alarm signals because it can't burn the glucose anymore. So very quickly, the body says, okay, this is dangerous for me. I'm going to stop burning the fat so I can burn a bit more glucose. And what I need to do is accumulate some of that fat that I can't burn. And now it says, well, how am I going to get rid of this glucose? And that's where insulin comes into it. So insulin gets rid of the glucose, but where does it store it? It stores it somewhere where there's lots of room. Where have we got lots of room? In our fat. So while we started with too much glucose, we've ended up with too much fat. So it's logical that if we want to burn the fat, we need to burn less glucose and have less glucose available. So that'll stop the glucose being stored as fat, and then it starts to burn the fat. And then your fat stores get smaller and smaller until you reach a good balance between what you eat and what you burn. Now, I agree this is a very big oversimplification, but it'll just help you think about what I'm going to present. So food's made up of protein, fat, carbohydrates, and smaller entities. As I said, protein and fat are essential because they can't be produced by our body. But glucose can be made or synthesized in the body for the cells, so we don't actually need to eat it. But even if we could, we can't get rid of carbohydrates and glucose from the food because every food is a combination of these different entities. They just have different ratios of them. So when you can't think of a macro tracking apps, how much protein or fat have I eaten today? You've got to think about real foods that you're eating because it contains more than one structure. Now, the hormone that acts at a cellular level to control all of this is insulin. Different foods will create different insulin responses within our body. Now, if you're healthy and you've got a normal blood glucose and a normal insulin level, then one of insulin's main roles is to help you store your protein, store your glycogen, and help you build your body and stay healthy. The problem is a big percentage of our population is metabolically unwell. And in these people, the insulin response is different, and the more insulin you get, the more fat storage you're going to have if you've got too much of the glucose on board. So remember that food is a combination of these different items, so we have to be careful which ones we eat. So for those interested in the science, here's a pretty picture of insulin, which is two amino acids, basically two chains of amino acid linked by disulfide bonds. And it's important to remember historically, before insulin was discovered, what happened to you if you developed type 1 diabetes, you basically wasted away because in those people, the insulin wasn't there to help them with the protein and fat storage to keep the body healthy. So at any given moment, we have about 5 grams of glucose floating around our blood, and that's for a 70 kilogram person. When we eat the sugar or the carbohydrate, it gets absorbed into our blood, and our blood sugar rises. So all carbohydrates, regardless of how they start off, end up as glucose in the blood. Now, the body knows that glucose is very damaging, so alarm bells start going. And it tries to drop us back to that 5 gram baseline as quickly as possible, and insulin's the hormone that gets it done. So why is glucose damaging? Well, we've got these things called advanced glycated end products. So you get glucose in the blood, it binds to a protein. It doesn't actually take any energy to bind to the protein. After that, you get what are called early glycation products, and at this stage it's still a reversible process. And we can measure this using something called an HbA1c, which I'll come back to. When it gets more advanced, the protein binding is irreversible, and that tissue is now damaged forever until it's replaced or dies. And there's no reversing the process once you get to this AGE stage. So whether we like it or not, this process is taking place in our bodies. It's part of aging, but we can either have it happen slowly as it should be or accelerate it by having lots of glucose in our blood. Now, since our red blood cells are bathed in glucose all the time, some of that binding happens to the red blood cells, and that's why in diabetics we can track the HbA1c because that measures how much glucose has bound to the red blood cell over the last 3 months or so. So AGEs slowly build up in tissue, but eventually the damage becomes obvious. This is seen in the eye as glaucoma, loss of elasticity of the walls of the blood vessels, hypertension. You're going to see it as disc degenerative diseases or other joint diseases, Alzheimer's, dementia, brain diseases, and eventually kidney and pancreas failure. So you can think of us as very low temperature ovens cooking ourselves at about 37 degrees over our entire lives. And we can either cook ourselves really slowly or we can rapidly increase that cooking rate by putting up our glucose. So the main hormone we're talking about is insulin, and insulin's released from the pancreas when there's blood in the bloodstream. So we eat the sugar, it goes into our blood. The blood causes a pancreas response, and the insulin gets into the blood, as you see here, and then the insulin drives the glucose out of the blood into liver, muscle, and fat. And in a healthy person, this is very important for muscle building. So you mustn't think of insulin as evil necessarily. Now, cell membranes are very complex. They're a bit like the wall of a fort to keep things in and out. But if you're the same as the cell wall, you can pass through it, whereas if you're not, you can't get through. Now, glucose is different than the cell wall and can't get through it. So it needs a door opened in the cell wall to get in. And insulin opens the door for glucose using something called a GLUT4 transporter. It drives the glucose out of the blood into the cell, and this is mainly in skeletal muscle, liver, and fat cells. Now, the storage form of glucose is glycogen, which I'm sure all of you have heard of. This is a bit like the stores in your kitchen cupboard. If you're hungry, open the kitchen cupboard and you eat something. It's a fantastic system as long as everything's in balance. But what happens now if we eat too much and we try to store too much glycogen? Well, the kitchen cupboards overflow. There's no room in the kitchen. The body has to take that glycogen and put it somewhere. Where does it put it? It puts it in the fat cells. That's de novo lipogenesis. So this slide looks a little bit complex, but don't worry, we're going to go through it bit by bit. The red stripe represents your blood, and the yellow part represents the fat cell. So we've eaten the sugar, it's in our body, the blood sugar levels are high, the body's got in emergency mode, and it's sending out lots of insulin to try and get rid of it. The liver and muscle glycogen stores are now full, and so the sugar has to get driven somewhere. It mainly gets driven into the fat cells around your abdominal organs and in the liver before going to the periphery. So when insulin comes into contact with a cell, the scientific name for that is adipocyte. It has two powerful effects working together. Number one, it prevents the cell from getting any smaller. And number two, it drives the glucose and the fatty acids into the cell. That increases its size. Now, it's almost impossible for the body to make new cells as an adult, but what it can do is make those cells bigger, and in a nutshell, that's the reason for weight gain. So now I'd like to take a couple of minutes to talk about complex carbohydrate. A lot of people think complex carbohydrates are better for you than glucose or sugar, but the reality is that when you eat a complex carbohydrate, it's digested and split into individual glucose molecules, and it enters the blood. So the definition of a complex carbohydrate is just about 12 glucose molecules linked together. So there's nothing fancy about a complex carbohydrate. Now it's important to understand how glucose actually becomes fat. The storage form of fat is triglycerides. So here we see a triglyceride with a glycerol and 3 fatty acids, and that's locked inside the cell. So in its complete state, with all of the bits together, that triglyceride can't pass through the cell wall. If you remember what we were talking about, it has to be the same as the cell wall. So with the triglyceride trapped in there, the fat cell can't get bigger or smaller. So we need to get the fat cells out or in. How does that happen? There's a hormone called lipoprotein lipase, and that splits the triglyceride into glycerol and fatty acids. Now, the fatty acids are the same as the cell wall, and they can just go straight through there. But the glycerol needs to be split into glucose. The GLUT4 transporter takes it in there, and then the glucose recombines with the glycerol to form a triglyceride again. In order for the cell to get smaller, the triglyceride needs to get broken down, and that's what this hormone here does. So let's look at the IN pathway. The IN pathway uses lipoprotein lipase to get stuff in, and insulin makes this much more effective. What does insulin do on the way out? It blocks hormone-sensitive lipase and stops the breakdown of the fatty acids, so the fat cell can't get smaller. So in summary, insulin increases the effect of lipoprotein lipase and blocks the effect of hormone-sensitive lipase, effectively increasing the size of the cell. So what does this mean for fat burning? So you can either be in a fat burning state if your insulin levels are very low, or you can be in a fat storage state if your insulin levels are higher. Now, here's very low insulin, but even a very small rise in insulin level over here, just moving from there to there, will take away your fat burning considerably and drive you into fat storage mode. So we really have to be very careful with what happens with our insulin response. Now, everyone's heard of insulin resistance in this audience, I'm sure. And what does it mean? Well, it's a bit like walking into a room where something smells bad. Initially, it hits your nostrils quite hard, but once you've been there for a while, you get used to the smell. Another way of saying that is repeated exposure to the stimulus causes less of a response. So you need more of that stimulus to make you notice it again. So when you've been in the room for a while, the smell goes away, but if somebody brings something really stinky, you'll notice it again, otherwise you've gotten used to it. So the action of insulin, as we discussed, is to take glucose out of the cells. Now, Paul's going to talk to us in more detail about the insulin resistance, and again, I'm simplifying things for the sake of this talk, but Paul will make it a little bit more complex. Unfortunately, when insulin resistance develops, it develops mainly in the muscle and fat cells and less so in the muscle and liver and less so in the fat cells. So the insulin is still there, the liver and muscle don't accept the glucose as much, so where does the glucose go with increased insulin? Into the fat cells. So despite having the same diet, the same exercise, over a 25-year period, as you develop some insulin resistance, you might only put on 1 to 2 kilograms a year. But if you start off at the age of 25 looking like this, 1 to 2 kilograms a year later, you end up looking like this without noticing much change. Now, 1 to 2 kilograms a year, if you divide it by 365 days, is not very much weight to be putting on each day of the year. So eventually, as the pancreas is required to pump more and more insulin, it burns out. Now, remember we talked about the AGEs, how it causes permanent damage? Well, the pancreas doesn't respond to insulin. It's not insulin sensitive. Therefore, it is damaged by the AGEs. And all those areas of the body that I showed you before that were damaged by AGEs don't have insulin receptors in them. Eventually, you get type 1 diabetes, and it's type 2 diabetes, I beg your pardon, and it's a process that creeps up on us slowly. So how can we tell if people are developing insulin resistance? It can happen to people of normal weight as well as people that are significantly overweight, but we know that it correlates very well with abdominal circumference and visceral fat levels. Luckily, we are able to actually measure insulin resistance in a blood test. This is called a glucose tolerance test. But a standard glucose tolerance test isn't good enough. You actually need to measure insulin at the 1 and 2 hour mark as well. You have a baseline sample drawn. They give you this 75 grams of sugary drink. You sit there so you don't burn it up too much, and then they measure you at 1 hour and 2 hours. But the test is not useful unless you measure insulin levels as well, and I'll show you why. Now, just for those of you that think, my God, how can they give me 75 grams of sugar? That's terrible. Well, 1 1/4 bottles of an up-and-go breakfast drink, about 1.3 cups of something like crunchy nut cornflakes, or about 4.5 slices of bread is the same as what they're giving you. So if you test high on that glucose tolerance test and you're eating a reasonably standard Australian diet, your sugar is up all of the time, because that's just one meal that's giving you that glucose tolerance test, and you're going to be eating more than that during the day. So if we look over here on the right, we see an insulin level and a blood glucose level, and they're fairly well matched. And this person has a normal plasma glucose and a normal insulin level. Today I'm just going to look at the 2 hour values. It's important to look at the 1 hour values as well, but it's really beyond the scope of today's talk, so I'm not going to spend a significant amount of time doing that. All right, 5 to 7 years later, the person's still eating this high carbohydrate diet, getting sugars and in their blood all of the time. Now, the insulin is starting to have a bit more of a problem, and you can see that your blood insulin level is starting to go up. But thankfully, the insulin's still doing its work. And so your blood glucose level stays low. So here we are with a normal blood glucose level. And if you've just done a standard glucose tolerance test without the insulin, you're going to be fantastic. My blood glucose level's still normal. I've got nothing to worry about. But now, look at what's happened to the insulin level. It's gone up from 11 to 83. So our previous person had an insulin level of 10. This person now has an insulin level of 83. But the insulin's still working well enough for their glucose to be controlled at a blood level. Results do not satisfy diagnostic criteria for impaired fasting glycemia or impaired glucose tolerance. And I would say to you that's not correct if you interpret them the right way. So we now go to the next stage. The person's sort of 12 or 15 years into their eating habits. You can see their blood sugar levels started to rise now. And their insulin continues to rise. So what's happened is the insulin kind of can't go much higher than this. It's, the pancreas is pumping out as much as it possibly can, and that's not enough to control the blood glucose, which is starting to rise. So impaired glucose tolerance, follow-up is recommended. So this is basically the first time that people are starting to have some inkling that there's something wrong with them. And this is the first point where most doctors would be saying to you, look, I'm worried about your diabetes. But you can see that we're probably 10 years too late with this person. This should have been addressed 10 years ago. So what's the last thing that happens? Well, the last thing that happens is that your insulin drops again. Well, why would your insulin drop again? The pancreas just burns out. It can't produce enough of the insulin for you. And so what happens to your blood glucose when your insulin isn't working? Well, it skyrockets. So this is the last stage. Now, even at this stage, it is somewhat reversible by changing your diet. So if you're in this situation, don't give up all hope. But it's a lot easier in the earlier stages for things to be improved. Now, the main reason you've developed this insulin resistance is because of carbohydrates, not because you weren't able to process or produce the insulin. Unfortunately, a lot of the medical paradigm up to now has been to give people insulin to control their diabetes. And again, as a simple orthopedic surgeon, if the glucose is causing the problem, not the insulin, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me that you would treat people with insulin when what you should be doing is taking away their glucose. And so we've got to get people into a more balanced environment, and this is what I'm going to talk to you about in my next talk, is about balancing your fat and glucose and energy sources. Thank you.